Hi, everyone. My name is Christina. I am 19 years old, and I almost killed a man recently. I was live streaming on Instagram while I was driving a car. Oof. This horror story happened a few months ago. I had just gotten my license that night, so I was enjoying myself, driving around until 3 in the morning. There were no people on the streets at all. I was driving pretty slowly, so I thought that starting a live stream to chat with friends would be a good idea. I've never been so wrong. I looked around at some point. No one was in sight, so I got distracted to read messages from my friend, and I hit a person. Despite the fact that the car was going pretty slowly, the hit was frighteningly loud. What do people say? Did my life flash before my eyes? Yes, my life literally flashed before my eyes, and that was just the beginning. I immediately got out of the car, of course. I discovered a man in his 40s, unconscious, under the bumper of my car. I was shocked. I don't even know where I got the strength to put him into the car, but I did. After breathing in and out for a little bit, the shock gradually went away, and I noticed that the live stream was still on. Thank God only 2 people were watching, including my best friend and some random subscriber. I thought that I could solve all the issues with that subscriber later, so I deleted the recording of my live stream and went to my best friend Lucas. He, as you know, was already aware of the situation. The man was still unconscious when I arrived at his house. My comfortable driver's seat seemed to be covered with 1,000 needles. My head was haunted by the worst thoughts, but Lucas calmed me down. He was a medical assistant, so he examined the man and said that he was all right, that he should wake up after a little while. Thank God. It was not the worst case scenario after all. However, we had to decide what to do next. Since the man's life was not in danger, Lucas offered to take him back to the place where I hit him and put him somewhere on a bench. Don't get me wrong, I would like to help him somehow, but this man could cause so many problems for me that my self-preservation instinct made me agree to Lucas's suggestion. So I went to commit another crime, but this time with the support of my best friend. I could not remember how to drive the car at that moment. I do not even remember my thoughts. I think that my head was completely empty at that moment. But the thing I remember perfectly is that this man woke up when we were halfway there and started yelling. And I was so scared that I almost got into another accident again. Naturally, I stopped the car immediately and we started talking. The man's name was Frank. I lied and said that I was taking him to the hospital to avoid any misunderstanding, but that didn't stop him from screaming. He was insulting me, insulting Lucas, and the worst part was that he introduced himself as a police lieutenant soon afterward. Just when you think it can't get any worse, all of a sudden, he is a police lieutenant, Frank Summers. He was threatening to put me in jail for a while, but then he suddenly backed up and offered me a deal. He offered to forget about everything and not cause me any problems with the law for $5,000. A real cop? I didn't know where I would get such a sum of money, but I agreed to his terms because I had no other choice. We exchanged numbers. I dropped him off at home, and he gave me a week to bring him the money. Ugh, we didn't even notice it was already morning. Lucas and I passed out right in the car for a couple of hours, and then we started thinking about how to solve my problem, which for some reason was just gaining momentum. Speaking of problems, I opened my Instagram the next morning and saw a message from that random follower who was the second viewer of my live stream. I felt desperate after reading that message. It said that the follower, Matthew, recorded my live stream and also wanted money for his silence. It was 5 times less than Frank had asked, but it was still $1,000. Long story short, my debts were like quicksand to me at that moment. I was afraid to ask my parents for help because, well, you know, it was just very scary. I thank the universe for a friend like Lucas. Besides his moral support, he started to try to help me find the money. He gave me some of his savings and then started selling things he no longer needed to help me even more. I followed his example and also started selling my unnecessary and some necessary belongings. Thankfully, this went unnoticed by my parents. We were very enthusiastic at first, but then the week Frank gave us came to an end and we had only managed to collect just a little more than $2,000. We were in despair once again. There was nothing left for me to do but meet with Frank. I didn't have enough money, and I needed to try to make amends. Thank God I managed to do so because of my tears. They were not fake. I was really emotional because of that situation. Frank gave me another week, so Lucas and I continued our sales. Unfortunately, I also had to deal with Matthew, and not just Frank. He was not very patient, so after a week of waiting, he gave me an ultimatum. Either I give him the money that same day, or he puts the video online that same day. However, he still agreed to a compromise at some point, but to his own kind of compromise. During our online negotiation, he said that since I didn't have any money, I could just come to his house for a romantic dinner, and then he would forget about that 1,000. And though he was obviously creepy, considering that he was blackmailing me, it seemed like a great offer at the time. Saving 1,000 for a couple of hours? Long story short, I agreed. I went to his house on that same day, or rather, that same evening. He cooked dinner, bought a few bottles of wine, complimented me, and all of a sudden Matthew didn't seem all that unpleasant. But this didn't last for long. After about an hour of conversation, he insistently started persuading me to go to the bedroom with him. I was stressed, but given the circumstances, I was ready to go for it. I just had one condition. Matthew had to delete the video of the accident in front of me before I did that. But after my condition, Matthew hesitated for some reason. And you know what? It turned out that this idiot was lying about everything all along. Of course, he was on my live stream on Instagram, but he did not have time to record anything. He's a jerk, not because he didn't have time to record anything, but because he was blackmailing me. But there are so many freaks in this world. Thank God I discovered he was one of them before he took advantage of me. This situation made me relax for a little while, but my main problem did not go away. Frank was still waiting for his money. Lucas and I continued to sell our stuff, but to be honest, our stuff was slowly running out, and we were only able to come up with half the required amount. We didn't have any ideas where we could have found such a sum of money so quickly, and well, we didn't have any choice. At some point, I had to ask my parents for help. It was quite nerve-wracking. When my dad found everything out, he shouted, "Live streaming while driving!" Then he banged his fist on the wooden table so hard that he left a mark. My mother threatened to take my car away from me as soon as they solved this whole blackmailer situation. But the best news for me was that they were going to help me. My dad didn't want to pay the blackmailer, especially since his old friend was the police captain, Mr. Nicholson. He consulted with him first, like asking him if he could talk to his subordinate so that he wouldn't press charges against me. But after Mr. Nicholson checked his database, it turned out there was no Lieutenant Frank Summers. Or rather, he may have existed somewhere, but certainly not in our city. A man pretending to be a police officer to blackmail someone interested Mr. Nicholson, and he took my case. He obviously did not promise that I'd be able to keep my driver's license, but he promised to help sort the situation out. The police went into investigation mode. When the time to pay Frank came, I went to Frank's with the undercover police officers. I took the money that I had collected with me. They had to document him taking the money and blah, blah, blah. When Frank found out that I hadn't managed to collect the entire amount, he got angry and started bullying me again, like saying that he, as an officer, could make my punishment harsher if I didn't bring him 10 grand, in addition to the money I already brought, in a week. But I knew that he was not working for the police. His threats began to amuse me at some point. Anyway, as soon as I handed him the money, the real cops who came with me handcuffed him and took him to the police station. And this is not the most interesting part. As a result of the police investigation, it turned out that Frank wasn't Frank. I wasn't told his real name, but this man turned out to be a criminal who specializes in these setup accidents to blackmail people. Well, how lucky was I to bump into him? As I said, the world is full of freaks. As soon as I realized that I didn't owe anyone any money anymore, I felt like I was over the moon. I haven't been that excited ever, even on my birthday. I got the money back after a little while because it was physical evidence, and I gave Lucas some of it. Plus, I decided to thank him for being there for me in a difficult moment. I offered to let him take the entire sum of money, but he refused. But I spent my share getting him a cool wristwatch with the inscription, "Best Friends Forever." As for my parents, they fulfilled their promise. Despite the fact that my license was not taken away from me because I was the victim of a criminal, my mother still forbade me to drive for a whole month because I neglected my own safety by live streaming. I got my car back about a week ago, and I've started driving very carefully after everything.